Lamido Sanusi Lamido. Sanusi Lamido Sanusi. Any bankers here?
Thank you very much for that. But let's start first of all with this identity issue about civil society versus government. Isa Remu, my comrade. Okay. No, wait. No. Let's go back because we didn't just appear as government officials, right? Isa Remu and myself were part of every demonstration and every riot when we were in the university together. Okay, because we were in the students' union. After that, Femi Falana and myself were in the Progressive Advance Movement. I was on the Kudrat Initiative for Nigerian Democracy. We fought the military. We were victims of Decree 2. So I'm part of civil society. Now, so this idea that there's a civil society outside government and that there are certain human beings who have sacrificed for Nigeria and those in government are working for exploitation. Let us first get that out of the way. Okay. Now let's talk about ideology. What is the ideology around subsidies? The issue around petroleum subsidy is not an ideological issue. Ideologically, everybody who knows development knows that you need to subsidize some things. The question is, do you subsidize consumption or do you subsidize production? Do you subsidize the poor or do you subsidize middlemen and rent seekers? Okay, and we have shown in the last few months that you can move from one form of subsidy to another. I'll give you a few examples, even with the central bank. In 2009, when we had an economic crisis, small and medium enterprises were folding up because they could not bear the high rate of interest and because banks were not giving them loans. In the central bank, we put up a fund, 200 billion naira to refinance loans to SMEs, give them money for 10 to 15 years at a maximum rate of interest of 7%. 4,000 companies benefited. Over 12,000 jobs were saved. Production capacity improved about 12-15%, and that is subsidy. We've spent years importing fertilizers. Okay, half of those fertilizer bags were sand. 50 kilogram bags actually weigh 35. Only 11% of farmers were getting the subsidized fertilizer. The subsidy is still there. We have changed how it is done. We now make sure that the subsidy goes to the farmer, not to the middleman. We had a company in Port Harcourt set up to produce fertilizer locally. Notori. It was indebted to banks. Over 30 years, it was about to close down. Couldn't pay interest, it could not compete to subsidize fertilizer. We provided financing of the form we gave SMEs, refinance the loan of Notori. Today, Notori is producing at 90% and creating jobs in Nigeria. So let us look at the ideology, and this is where labor should look. If you subsidize consumption of imported products, what you are doing is creating production facilities, keeping them open abroad, creating jobs abroad, and labor ideologically, we talk about ideology, labor should be in the forefront of stopping those subsidies and subsidizing domestic production. Don't subsidize the importation of petroleum products. Subsidize those who want to set up refineries. Give them power. So this is the first ideological issue. It's not about economics, ideology. Okay, now what is the nature? I have been a strong proponent of the removal of subsidy, and for that I have been chastised by my colleagues in the civil society as an ideological turncoat. Now let's talk about why I got first of all involved with subsidies. 2009, we looked at the books of banks that were going under. We found that our banks had lost their capital. the banks were about to collapse. And there were two sectors of this economy that led to the collapse of the banking system. The first was the capital market, banks taking money and speculating on stocks. The second was petroleum marketing. Count the number of human beings that were unknown that in 10 years have become multi-billionaires from being in petroleum marketing. I published the names, for the first time, I published the names of all the bad loans in the banks. Half of them were petroleum marketers. The money had been taken, LCs had been established, subsidies had been paid, the money was not paid back to the banks. Why? My suspicion is that a significant part of those products never got into this country. Because if they came in, they would have turned to cash, and that cash would have serviced the debt. So where did the money go? Now let's go back to simple economics. All of you that read economics, EC 101, I taught micro in university. Whenever you fix a price below equilibrium, what happens? You have a black market. If you subsidize that, you have what is called rent. Because this thing we call subsidy is not subsidy, it is rent. And I'll explain. You have a product that should sell for 140 naira in this country. The government, and you know, this is one of the most stupid forms of subsidy you can ever find. Because a subsidy is, you say, okay, I will pay 20% of the cost, or 30% of, that is what you call a subsidy. When you tell people, whatever the cost of petroleum products, you will not pay more than 65. It is not subsidy, it is a guaranteed maximum price. Whether oil is $200 a barrel, or $150 a barrel, or $100 a barrel, the government has an unlimited capacity for absorbing the difference. It is not at an exchange rate. We moved from an exchange rate of 118 in 2007 to an exchange rate of 160 today. That exchange rate differential is translated into the cost of petroleum products. The government absorbs it. You import, you have inefficiency in the port, you have demurrage. This is the only country where the government guarantees that to pay you with the demurrage. You come and claim that your boat was there for 1 month because you could not offload. The government pays you. It's a business in which any idiot can make money. So let us talk. So what is this? So who are we subsidizing? Who are the people that have benefited from this? Now Ngozi has said, and we all know, we can deceive ourselves. We can deceive ourselves, but we all know. I come from Kano. You go to Kano City, yes, in all these PPMC stations you buy petrol for 65. Drive out of Kano and start heading out to Kudu, it becomes 80 naira, 100 naira, 100. Many of the people in this room don't even know how much is paid for fuel. We work for companies and for government, and we just enter our cars. We just enter our cars. We can't remember the last time we went to a petrol station and took out money from our pockets to buy petrol. There is a myth. You buy 65 in Lagos, go out. The poor people that live outside Lagos, these are the poor people that Labour is protecting. How much do they actually pay? They don't pay 65 naira. Meanwhile, if I were in the business of petroleum importation and I established an LC to import 20,000 metric tons, and the government gives me back the guaranteed payback, anything I make over 65 naira is a wolf. Okay? Now let's go back again to economics and to arbitrage opportunities. Why is it that in the subsidized environment of Saudi Arabia you don't have smuggling? Because Saudi Arabia is surrounded by Kuwait and Bahrain and Yemen and Qatar, and in that entire territory everything is subsidized. There is no arbitrage opportunity. You cannot take fuel from Saudi Arabia and make a profit by smuggling to Bahrain. Here we say we are selling at 65 naira in Cameroon, in Niger, in Chad, in Benin. All over West Africa it is for 140 naira. It does not take rocket science for me to know that if I can import into Nigeria, get this subsidy, I have a margin of 80 naira, enough to bribe everybody from here to the border and across. Ngozi said we are consuming 35 million liters. 35 million liters a day. With the population of 160 million naira. How many cars do we have in Nigeria? How many cars? 35 million is 1/3 of the entire population of Nigeria. How many cars do we have? It is not true. Some of those LCs that are established, you know, go and talk to Nimasa. The ship comes on the sea. Vessels go, offload from the sea, take the petrol to Cameroon and to Benin. Meanwhile, somebody at the port ticks a piece of paper. You will see a list of bills of lading saying that 15 vessels landed in Lagos on the same day. 15. Look at the dates. You will see 15 vessels. I have seen it. 15 vessels landing on the same day. Somebody will tick that he actually saw them. Those are the documents that are presented. And why would it not happen? You have created an opportunity for rent seeking. The difference between 65 and 140 is so huge. 1 trillion naira is enough to bribe anybody to sign anything. Okay, I'm ready to believe that 1 trillion cannot bribe all this. So maybe you need 5 trillion. The point I'm making is that we talk about corruption, but corruption thrives on opportunities that we create for people to be corrupt, and you need to shut off those opportunities. If you say you have a subsidy, and if the poor people of Nigeria are not buying fuel at 65 naira per liter, then it is not a subsidy, it is rent. So what we are saying is, I am not a proponent for removal of subsidy. I'm a proponent for removal of rent. Now let's look at the impact of this distortion on the system and on the economy. And let us talk about the areas that we agree on. I'm speaking for Ngozi and for Dizani here and everybody. Let us talk about the things we all agree on. We all agree that there is corruption in government and that it needs to be addressed. We all agree that there is waste in government and we need to cut off on expenditure that is not reasonable. Okay? We all agree that government has been inefficient, that delivery has not been good, and that we need to improve on execution and delivery. Okay? So we're not here to debate that. And as Nigerians in the public and private sector, we are all responsible. I go to private sector meetings and they say government is so corrupt. I say, how many of you can swear that in your life you have not offered a government officer bribe? How many? Because corruption is the private sector that bribes public officers. So we all have to stop. So let us not argue about that. Let us agree that this is not the issue today. It's not about saying that the government has earned your trust. Now let's look at the impact on the economy of this subsidy. Between January, I'm giving you more facts, other than facts given by the coordinating minister. Between January and November, the total amount of foreign exchange we sold to petroleum marketers at WDAS and Interbank was in excess of $8 billion. Over the same period, the total amount of subsidy that was given to these same marketers was another $8 billion. That is 16 billion. 16 billion. Now I'm going to ask you, it was actually 16.2 billion if you want to know the numbers. Now do you know what? The total amount, at least from my records, the total amount of money that the government earned, that came to us in the Federation Reserves from the entire oil sector in the same period was 200,000 less than that. We spent more money paying for LCs and paying subsidy than we earned from the oil sector. Now ask yourselves, is this a country? Is this an economy? You're borrowing, we have spent 1.4 trillion naira, one third of total government expenditure subsidizing petroleum products. I'll give you another number. Ngozi has given you reserves per capita. Issa Aremu said, let's talk about production. Let's talk about production. We produce 2.2 million barrels a day. With our population of 160 million, every day Nigeria produces 1 barrel of oil for 80 Nigerians. Okay? 1 barrel for 80 Nigerians. Look at all the other OPEC countries. The nearest to us is Algeria, which has 1 barrel for 30. And Algeria is a gas producing country. Saudi Arabia produces 1 barrel of oil for every 3 citizens every day. Okay? Now, you produce 1 barrel for 80. Your share of revenue of that barrel is maybe 50%. So you can, for effectively say it's 1 barrel for 160 Nigerians. They need power. They need infrastructure. They need medical care. They need food. You need to pay salaries. Women are dying every day in childbirth. Children are dying of malaria. People are dying of AIDS. You need roads. You need petroleum subsidy. Please give me your hierarchy of priorities. What would you sacrifice? We are taking 1/3 of that money and paying petroleum subsidy, leaving 2/3. And out of that 2/3, Ngozi will tell you 70% goes to pay salaries. The same people are talking about government expenditure. If you say you're going to retrench workers in the civil service, they'll be up in arms. How do you reduce salary? How do you reduce the salary bill? The same people that have said we want minimum wage of 18,000 naira are saying you are spending too much. Where is the money going to come from? To pay those salaries, to maintain those civil servants, to provide health care, you need to free up resources. I mean, this is what economics is about. Now, to come and tell me that there's going to be hardship and difficulty is not an economic argument. The economic argument is to say, this is the cost of removing subsidy. What is the cost of not removing it? And let me tell you something. This government can continue paying this subsidy to 2015. It will not come down. But the next government will be saddled with a debt burden that it cannot maintain. And the Greece situation would be nothing compared to where we are. So, to think that, these decisions are not easy. Europe today is facing a crisis. In 2008, the price of oil crashed from $147 a barrel to $40. Up to the week to $37. Up till 2 weeks, 3 weeks before then, I was in Washington in the World Bank meeting. They had different models and projections. Oil price will never fall below $85 a barrel. It came to 37. The only reason this economy continued growing was that we had reserves of $62 billion, which are now down to 30. That was a shock absorber. We don't have that shock absorber today. If the oil price crashes again by 30-40%, if the naira goes to 200 naira to the dollar, when you can no longer pay salaries, when inflation goes to 18% because of monetized, we have printed money, then we will know what a crisis is. You have to prepare yourself. What happens? You can see Europe every day. What happens? China is slowing down. There's a property bubble in China. India has had inflation. The Reserve Bank has increased rates 12 times. Inflation has not come down. Brazil is slowing down. All the countries that provided the engine of growth in 2008 are in slowdown mode. Do you know what we are facing? Are you in this world? Meanwhile, instead of preserving your government balance sheet so that in the event of a crisis you can cope, you want to continue paying 1 trillion naira. 1 trillion naira in subsidy. To who? To who? No, sorry. No, wait. so fine. So we talk about costs, and you know, I would be the last person. I'll be the last person to say that there are no costs to removal of subsidy. And I'm even willing to guess that this policy will never be a popular policy, and it is normal. If people are paying 65, that's those that are paying 65, and then have to pay 140, it's not going to be popular. But the question is, for those of us in government, is our responsibility to pursue a popular policy or to pursue a policy that is right for Nigeria? We are willing to be unpopular because we have to be. The easiest thing, the easiest thing for this government to do is to do the popular thing. Continue paying, and then the next government gets up. Look, Ngozi said we borrowed 850 billion naira last year. This year, 850 billion. The subsidy was 1.1 trillion, 1.3 trillion. What does that mean? You borrowed to only pay part of the subsidy. So all the entire federal government debt was not even sufficient to pay the subsidy. The deficit that want to bring to 3%, how do you bring it up to 3%? If there's a shock to government revenues today, if there's a shock to reserves, what will happen? The deficit goes to 6-7%. That is how Greece got there. And what is this subsidy? Who is paying it? I'll just go to two final points. You have this conception that Nigerian government is paying subsidy, Saudi government is paying subsidy. One is true, one is false. If a government is running huge fiscal savings, having provided your basic needs, it has extra money, like Saudi Arabia, and it takes part of that surplus to subsidize you, that is government paying. If your revenues are already not sufficient for you to provide the services of your large and growing population, and 70% unemployed, 90% living on less than $2 a day, 70% living on less than $1 a day, a population that is poor by every HDI, you don't have power, you don't have infrastructure, your agriculture is disconnected, you don't have irrigation. If you are already not earning enough to do that, when you borrow to subsidize, it is our children that are subsidizing us, because they are the ones that will pay that money. It is not the government. Nduka, when you invite me, you let me talk. I said I had 2 points. I have one. So the final point is on inflation, because I have been challenged. People said you said inflation. I mean, Issa has said inflation will go up. You know, inflation will go up. If I ask Issa, by what percent? By what percent? By what percent? Because I have worked out scenarios, I have worked out numbers, and I'll give you facts. Look at your consumer price index. There's a total breakdown given by MBS. The percentage weight in the CPI given to fuel for transportation is less than 1.5%. Okay, let us assume that there are other effects. I've even said, look, let us multiply that by 10. Let us say that in your index, petroleum products will have an impact of 15%. That is 10 times the contribution to the index, correct? If you double the price, 15% is just 1/6 of the total index of 100%. If you double the price of petroleum products today, and if you assume a one-on-one translation, that 15 becomes 30. You divide the extra 15 by 6, it is a month-on-month increase in the rate of inflation of 2.5%. Okay, 15 divided by 6. Now, my numbers based on time series have shown that a month-on-month increase of 3% will lead to an annual increase of 2% in the rate of inflation. For the rate of inflation to go up, even on these assumptions, to go up by 4%, you will need to increase petroleum prices by 200%. These are facts. The numbers are there. So now, is that a good thing? No. But in 2009, inflation was 16%. We brought it down to 10.5%. I am not happy. I want to get single-digit inflation. I'm not happy to go to 12 or 13%. But by the time you then create the space for building your refineries, by the time the other reforms go on in the power sector, by the time we begin to reduce the pressure on foreign exchange from importation of things like rice and wheat, we're able to use the exchange rate, the interest rate, and general fiscal discipline to bring down inflation. It will not be done immediately, but it is about making a choice to take a difficult decision now that is in the medium and long-term interest of the Nigerian economy. So final word, this is not about ideology, it is about simple economics and simple common sense.